Elias stood on the 45th floor of his glass and steel tower, looking out at the city. To him, the view wasn't just architecture, it was a grand scoreboard. Every shimmering glass pane and every crane piercing the clouds represented a tactical victory in his portfolio. He was a self-made man, a devout believer in the gospel of merit. When he sat in his mahogany row church, he heard the parable of the talents not as stewardship, but as a mandate for compounding interest. He had multiplied his gold, seeing it as the ultimate mark of God's favor. He ignored the scripture's warning of the eye of a needle. For Elias, wealth was proof of worth. Poverty was a failure of initiative. He believed every dollar was a monument to his intelligence. Miles away, where skyscraper shadows didn't reach, Omar wiped metallic dust from his counter. His hardware store was a maze of rusted hinges and the scent of motor oil. While Elias calculated bonuses, Omar performed a different arithmetic: Zakat. To the world, Omar's margins were thin, yet he approached his earnings with trembling responsibility. The money in the drawer was amana, a sacred trust from God. He was a custodian, not an owner. He meticulously set aside his obligatory charity, knowing this wasn't just a donation, but a systematic purification of his soul and his property. Their worlds collided over an urban redevelopment project Elias's firm was spearheading. The plan was clinical: demolish the aging blocks of the Eastern District for luxury lofts. Omar's shop and the community center sat in the path of the wrecking balls. To Elias, this was progress. To Omar, it was the destruction of a sanctuary. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Elias justified the displacement, believing that by increasing the land's value, he was being a good servant of his resources. He carried the heavy eviction notices, ignoring the warnings that to whom much is given, much is required. Omar faced pressure. Creditors were knocking, and business was flagging. Friends urged him to skip his charity to save his shop, but Omar held to the Quranic principle that charity does not decrease wealth. He believed giving in hardship was the truest test of faith. The day Elias arrived to serve notices, his designer suit stood in contrast to the dusty street. He walked into the store, looking around at the humble shelves, seeing only inventory to be liquidated. Instead, he found Omar, whose hands were stained with work and steady with calm. Omar offered Elias a cup of hot tea. Elias was caught off guard by the man's peace. "Why do you do it?" Elias asked. "You give away money you don't even have. Why throw it away when you're about to lose everything?" Omar looked at him with calm depth. "I am not throwing it away," Omar replied. "I am purifying it. It is tazkiyah. If I keep what belongs to the poor, my bread is bitter and my soul is heavy. Wealth is not what we hold in our hands, Elias, but what we send ahead of us." Elias felt an inexplicable chill. The certainty of his world, built on spreadsheets, felt suddenly fragile and hollow. He walked out, the tea's heat lingering in his throat. As he reached his car, his phone vibrated violently. It was his assistant, her voice frantic and high-pitched. The markets had taken a catastrophic dive in the last hour. A scandal had broken regarding the firm's offshore accounts, the ones Elias personally managed. His assets were being frozen. The firm was implicated in a fraud that would wipe out his entire personal fortune overnight. The self-made man stood on the sidewalk, clutching the useless eviction notices as his kingdom turned to ash in his hands. The sirens of the city sounded like a funeral dirge for his career. Suddenly, everything changed. Now, the weight of the world shifted beneath his expensive feet. Elias sat in his darkened penthouse, the silence echoing louder than any trading floor roar. The panoramic view of the city, once his private kingdom, now felt like a mocking gallery of all he had lost. His assets were frozen as tight as winter soil, and the friends who once toasted his genius had vanished into the shadows, treating his name like a contagion in the high finance world he ruled. He was the rich fool of parables come to life, realizing that his barn was full, but his soul was utterly destitute. His identity, anchored in decimal points, had been built on shifting sand. As the rain streaked his windows, he realized he wasn't just broke. He was fundamentally broken. The pedestal of merit had crumbled, leaving him staring into a void that gold could no longer fill. In the shadows of the Eastern District, the reality was different. Though demolition loomed like a guillotine, a different energy pulsed through the streets. Because Omar had practiced tzedakah for decades, giving voluntary charity in both plenty and poverty, a miracle of the spirit unfolded. Neighbors who had once received a kind word or a repair on credit now brought him loaves of bread and their own meager savings. This was the Islamic social safety net, a living web of hearts bound by mutual care. Omar's shop was struggling, yet his life was overflowing with a wealth that no market crash could ever touch or take away. Driven by aimless hunger, Elias returned to the neighborhood he had once sought to erase. He walked with his head down, his designer coat feeling like a leaden shroud. He eventually found the community center. Instead of boards and padlocks, the earthy scent of lentil soup drifted through the air. Omar was there, sleeves rolled up, serving steaming bowls of thick spiced soup to the elderly, the orphaned, and the recently displaced. Elias entered, not as a predator, but as a man starving for a reason to exist. Omar did not gloat. With quiet dignity, he simply handed Elias a bowl and gestured toward a worn wooden bench. They sat in the dim light, the city's noise muffled by brick. Elias spoke of the camel through the eye of a needle, finally understanding the narrowness of the life he had led. Omar nodded, reciting verses from Surah At-Takathur about how the rivalry for worldly gains diverts humanity until the grave. They recognized a shared truth. Wealth is a fitna, a trial designed to reveal what remains when the gold is gone. Elias confessed that even with millions, he had felt an impoverished, hollow ache. Omar taught him that true risk, or provision, isn't a bank balance, but the peace of a satisfied heart. Just as Elias felt a flicker of hope, his past clawed back. He discovered a legal loophole that could restore his standing if he moved forward with the demolition immediately. His former boss called with a predatory offer. "Sign the order, Elias. We'll blame the juniors and get you back in a corner office by Monday." Elias stood with the heavy gold pen trembling in his hand, a relic of a life he no longer recognized. He looked through the window at the children playing in the courtyard, their laughter the only music in a harsh world. He faced a choice between the status he craved and the humanity he had just discovered. He returned to his files, searching for a way to justify the betrayal. But as he dug through the original land deeds, his eyes caught a glaring discrepancy. A signature was forged. A date was falsified. The entire multi-million-dollar project was built on a fraudulent deed. If he exposed this, the demolition would stop and the center would be saved. But his career would be permanently destroyed. He stood at the very edge of a new kind of wealth, holding a secret that could either buy back his old life or finally save his soul. Elias stared at the heavy gold pen sitting on his mahogany desk. It was a cold instrument of his trade, used for years to sign away lives and livelihoods with a mere flick of the wrist. His former boss was on the line, his voice a honeyed rasp of promises, offering Elias a way back into the inner circle of power if he would only let the demolition of the community center proceed quietly. But Elias looked through the window at the children playing in the courtyard below, and for the first time in his career, he did not see obstacles to progress or figures on a spreadsheet. He saw the least of these that his faith had long commanded him to protect. With a quiet, trembling resolve, he hung up the phone without saying a word. Instead of signing the eviction order, he gathered the evidence of the land deed fraud and sent it to every major news outlet in the city. He did not just leak the truth. He dismantled the very foundation of his old life. The fallout was instantaneous and absolute. By exposing the deep-seated corruption of the development firm, Elias became a pariah in the world of high finance. His former boss followed through on his threats, ensuring Elias was stripped of his remaining severance package and blacklisted from every major brokerage in the country. Within 48 hours, Elias walked out of his glass tower for the final time with nothing but 2 suitcases and the clothes on his back. By the world's definition, he was now poor, a man who had fallen from the heights of the metropolis to the level of the dusty streets he once intended to pave over. Yet as he felt the cool evening air on his face, he realized the crushing weight that had sat on his chest for decades had finally vanished. With nowhere else to go, Elias found his way back to the neighborhood hardware store. He did not go as a consultant or a predator, but as a wayfarer in need of hospitality. Omar found him standing outside as the sun began to dip below the skyline, looking tired but inexplicably peaceful. Without hesitation, Omar closed his shop and led Elias to his modest home behind the storefront. There they broke bread together, sharing a meal of simple lentils, rice, and dates. In that quiet room, the Christian command to love thy neighbor and the Islamic duty of hospitality merged into a single lived reality. Omar's wife poured tea, and for the first time, Elias felt he belonged to a family larger than his own bank account. They stayed up late into the night, talking not of what was lost, but of what could be built from the ruins. Elias shared his deep knowledge of market structures and legal frameworks, while Omar spoke of the communal spirit of Waqf, the Islamic tradition of creating a permanent endowment for the public good. They decided to work together to transform the saved community center into a social enterprise. It would be a place of stewardship, where the resources of the community were managed not for private profit, but for the elevation of every resident. Elias finally realized that laying up treasures in heaven was not a metaphor for a distant afterlife, but a blueprint for a life of radical service in the present. A year later, the neighborhood was unrecognizable, not because of new skyscrapers, but because of the renewed spirit of its people. The community center was thriving, housing a library, a health clinic, and a micro-loan office that helped locals start their own businesses. Elias was no longer the man in the designer suit. He was the teacher in the classroom, showing young men and women how to navigate the complexities of finance without losing their souls. He had discovered a new type of wealth, a wealth of purpose. He saw his professional expertise not as a weapon for accumulation, but as a gift to be shared, fulfilling the mandate to care for the community. The narrative of their lives proved that while their rituals and languages differed, the core of their faiths beat with the same pulse. Both Islam and Christianity viewed wealth as a profound test of the soul, a trial that could either enslave a man or set him free through the act of giving. They had learned together that true prosperity is only found when the hand is open, not clenched in a fist. On the day of the center's first anniversary, a small brass plaque was placed by the entrance. It bore 2 inscriptions side by side. On the left, the words of the New Testament, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." On the right, the prophet's wisdom, "The best of people are those that are most useful to people." As the sun set over the bustling neighborhood, the screen faded slowly to black, leaving only a final haunting reflection for the audience. If you lost every cent you owned today, what wealth would you have left in your soul?